to inform and educate, you also have to entertain to a certain degree, because that's how the information will stick. So
Absolutely.
I don't like to make it boring. I like to make this interactive. So you'll have pretty pictures. The slides are there as a basis for a foundation for the conversation, but I'm gonna talk about concepts back and forth because they're all interchangeable and they will fit in together. So I may have it on one slide, but I'll be going into a different tangent, but you'll see how it's going to tie in. As I mentioned, feel free to put your questions in the chat and my co-host will chime in. Also, you can feel free again to unmute yourself and say hello, your name and your question, and happy to answer as best as we can. So today, we are coming together for our latest presentation. This one is on the legal guide for real estate investing. So a very popular topic, one that people ask a lot about. And this is where I want you to think about it. We are giving this presentation today for the realtors, but the truth of the matter is you're going to wear several hats, because as a realtor, you may in fact be an investor yourself. You may have family, friends, colleagues who want to do quote unquote real estate investing. And all of us as professionals, when we get asked on this topic, there's actually a team of us that are involved in the concept of quote unquote real estate investing. So yourselves as the realtor assisting the buyer or seller, you have the lawyer closing the transaction, advising. We have the accountant that should come into place for tax planning is very, very important. Financial advisor as well in allocating monies, because, for people, this is long, there's only a finite amount of money. So if it's going to go into real estate, it may very well not go into stocks, bonds, crypto, whatever people plan to invest in. So they're working hard at their jobs. You could be you working hard at your job, making money, and then you're saying, okay, what do I want to do with this money at the end of the day? How do I invest it? How do I build my wealth? How do I make my fortune? That's the idea. So before I was a lawyer, I was in business school at Schulich, and I have my BBA degree, and I did that so I can help business clients, advise them, because I thought, how am I going to be a quote unquote business lawyer, corporate lawyer, real estate lawyer, without understanding how accounting works, how economics, finance works? So that's my mindset. But when you're listening to the presentation, you'll understand that this is, a lot of it's not legalese. It's actually business sense, business decisions. And we're being asked to discuss things that are supposed to be outside of our wheelhouse, outside of our practice areas, but there's no choice. When you're talking about investing, you have to understand how business works, because I can present the legal options, the accountant can present the accounting tax options. People at the end, they have to make the best business decision that they can make. So if we're going to be professionals and advising clients on joining us on the journey of real estate investing, we have to understand that there are different professionals that have to advise them on it, and making sure that our clients make the best possible decisions. When I was teaching with AREA, the real property law course, which you all took at some point or another, I always told my class, whenever you're advising a client, and it's anything beyond a standard transaction, it's one thing when you're going to go buy yourself a resale condo to go live in, you're selling your house to buy another property. That's one thing. As soon as you start getting anything out of the ordinary, we're talking about assignments, new construction, vacant land, substantially renovated homes, make sure no matter what, you have your accountant, you have your lawyer in place, get your tax advice, get your legal advice. Very, very important. So why? Because if they're not making the best decisions at the end of the day, the clients, they're going to look back to you potentially as a professional and saying, why didn't you tell me there was a tax implication here? Why didn't you tell me I wasn't making the best business decision I could? Why did I not put this investment property in a corporation? Now I have a big issue as far as flipping it, or the tax hit I'm going to take, or I want to pass it along to my children. And you're going to say, well, I don't know the tax part of it. Well, you should have told me. I should have spoken to an accountant. So just always keep in mind, when somebody's contacting you and letting you know, hey, I want to work with you, I'm looking at doing some big real estate investing, and I'm thinking about building a long-term portfolio, you in writing, you tell them afterwards, thank you very much for the meeting. I'm really looking forward to working with you and building a lifetime of a relationship together and helping you build your fortune. Please make sure you have your lawyer and your accountant in place. Make sure you get your tax and legal advice. That's something, by putting that in writing in the future, if there is going to be an issue, you can at least come back and say, I did put that out there. So just something to keep in mind. So With that being said, welcome to the wonderful world of real estate investing. If this is your first time, second time, 10 times seeing me, you'll always see that I put the picture. That's my updated picture. I'm Jonathan, the chosen lawyer, and I work with clients in many areas of law. And I'll show you here as far as what our firm does. Don't worry about taking notes here because I will be passing this presentation afterwards to the powers to be, and they're going to be sending you the nice PDF of it. So you will have this. So if you can't sleep at night, you get worried about real estate investing and you remember that seminar and what did he talk about, you can go back to the notes. So I assist clients with purchase, sales, refis in real estate, corporate commercial. When you talk about investing, you often think about corporations, joint venture agreements. There could be tenancies involved, leases. So we assist clients with that department. Wills and estates. So people do think about powers of attorney and wills as well, as far as long-term applications with their properties. And as well, we also look after certain areas in family law. Very popular to do cohabitation agreements, prenups. So again, depending on people's statuses, they have to think about multiple layers when they're going to be dealing with properties, especially as investments. So we can assist you with those. And everything is virtual now. So we are signing up clients virtually, paperless, but we do have multiple offices to assist if people do need to come in. But I probably meet 1% of my clients now in person. Everything is now virtual. So literally people always ask me like, where's your office located? Where's your office located? I can close a property that's located anywhere in Ontario, and I can be in Iceland and you could be in Panama, and it doesn't matter. We can all meet over we'd be literally like this, and we'd have our phones open and we're signing on our phones. So that's the new world. So the way you're all on DocuSign, we're on a program called Singraphy, where we're doing hand initials, hand signatures drawn out, but they're virtual. So that is the new reality. And last but not least, if you enjoy or tolerate my voice, I do have a weekly podcast called the Chosen Life Podcast, where I bring on guests and we talk about living the chosen life or wanting to live the chosen life. And believe me, real estate investing comes up, believe it or not, because the true wealthy tend to own a lot of real estate. So that does come up a lot in conversation. So if people want to get inspired on living the chosen life, that's where to find me. And we're on all social media. So my infomercial is done. And now we've come to our main topic of the day, real estate investing, and why you're all here today and things to think about. So the presentation is in a certain order for a reason. It's not gonna be like a traditional presentation I would give, because I felt like this is the order of things we need to think about as far as investments go. So there's multiple levels as far as how people consider when it's time to do real estate investing. So I would say a very common one is, and you'll see this a lot, you have that young person that goes and buys their first condominium unit and, builds up some equity. Then they sell the unit and use that money to buy their first house. Then they use that equity over time and they go buy a bigger house. And then they use the equity, buy an even bigger house. And then as they get older, they start to downsize and take that equity out of the house and they go and put money away for retirement. That tends to be the traditional flow of things. Well, we are in the year 2022 now, and young people have gotten a lot smarter than they were in the past. So there were people before that were accumulating a lot of properties through equity, but I would say now people in their 20s and 30s tend to think of this more. So they buy that first condo unit and they've saved up their money. They were living at home and they look down the road and they built some equity into the condo. Instead of selling that condo now, they're saying to themselves, you know what? I can keep this thing. I can rent it out and I'm going to go buy my next property and I'll go live in that one. That's one that I tend to see occurring more and more. Or I'm going to buy a property and I'm going to rent out my basement. And so it's going to produce some income for me, help me pay down my mortgage, and I get to live in there. Or maybe I'm going to do that in a triplex. So other types of scenarios we see as well. You have the traditional couples, two people getting together, and more and more I'm seeing people not actually legally married, but they are in a relationship, and they're saying, you know what, we're gonna buy this together because no matter what happens to our relationship, we can't buy this property otherwise, but combining our monies we can. So this is a good idea. So they think of it, so it becomes a business relationship. More and more, personal relationships, but they are actually business relationships. And some of them will actually do agreements together, which we'll get into, called a joint venture agreement. There's different labels on them, but the gist of it is the same, outlining we're buying the property, who's putting in what, and who's going to carry the expenses. What if we want to get out of this thing? How do we buy out each other? What happens when we sell? So we're seeing that more and more. Seeing friends, maybe 2 friends, maybe 3 friends coming together and saying, you know what, we can't afford to buy a property, but if we combine or pool our assets, we can, and now we can go buy a property together. I've seen siblings buying properties together. And I know one sister act that they go and I think they're on their 3rd property now, if I'm not mistaken. So they live in a property together, and then they own 2 more properties. And it's great because they're acquiring assets, they're building wealth. It's no different really in the stock market, because the real estate market, it can go up, it can go down. But with what the media is telling you and what you're seeing, it's like the sky is always going to be the limit, right? But I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've seen what a recession looks like. I've seen what economic downturn in other countries looks like, and our country being afraid. So, people are saying the good times will be there forever, but they're not. So we have to remember, it is an investment at the end of the day. With investment does come risk. I bring up often with new construction. I've seen people going ahead with investment, and they're saying, you know what, I'm like the smartest person in the world. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna buy from a builder, and I'm gonna buy 3 units from the builder, whether like 3 towns, 3 condos, 3 houses. I have to put down very little money. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna assign this thing in the future, and it's gonna double in price before closing, and I'll just take my profit and I'm gonna run. Not understanding that there's a chance that all of a sudden the economy can come at a halt at a moment's notice. And appraisals can come back and saying, you know what, I know you paid this amount for each of these units, but it's actually not worth as much now because that's what the market is bearing. And so you're not getting a mortgage enough on the value of what you paid. So now you got to come up with a difference in equity and saying, I don't have that money, and not being able to close with builders. So these are real life scenarios. So we could talk about so many different ways as far as people's investments, but you have an idea then that there is not one traditional model anymore. It could be one person, it could be a couple, it could be friends, it could be coworkers, it could be friends pulling together. Sky's the limit. There are people that are putting together corporate entities where they're saying, we're going to take on, as far as purchasing properties, all you're doing is investing your dollars, and you have a share inside of our little company, and this company is the one that's going to own the property. So you get the feeling of owning real estate, and you get to enjoy the appreciation of it, but we're going to manage it. We're going to charge that back to you, and you get very little decision making, but you have the right to. So no different. Like if I go buy shares in Rogers, I don't get a say in Rogers, right? I just hope that it's going to do well. I hope it's going to give me dividends if that kind of stock provides that. And the same thing with owning shares in a company that own real estate. So there's so many ways of going about it. The last one, which I saw, which I found was really interesting, is even the models of condominiums you see now, that they're talking about taking a house and making it into a condo building. So I'm going to own a room inside the house, and that's my condo. And then I have to share the kitchen. I have to share a bathroom. It's amazing where they can go with it. And why are they doing that? Because people can't afford real estate anymore. And they're saying, I want to get into the market. I want something to own that's mine. So I got to own a room. I'll own a room. That's fine. So there's going to be very creative ways of it. But again, it's when I look at it, I don't just think of it as, okay, there's a house and they're going to have 7 rooms, so 7 condo units, and 7 people are going to live there. It's 7 real potential investment opportunities. So you're going to have, college kids living there potentially to rent out to them. The people who are going to buy them are not usually always the end users, it's investors. So you're going to encounter these kind of people that find these opportunities, or if you're really good at it, you're going to find the opportunities and tell them, I think you can invest in this, and I think this is something you can put your money into and hold it long term, and it'll pay off for you. And we'll talk about what that means in a few minutes. But first and foremost, when they do decide they're going to purchase a property as investment, they do have to decide their structure. This is something that they're going to first talk about with the accountant to make the tax plan. So again, everything is always tax driven. Don't kid yourself here. So at the end of the day, we have to decide how we're going to make the most amount of income and how we're going to minimize our expenses and minimize our taxes. So doing that, anybody who's going to purchase a property under a real estate investment does have to think as far as their structure and what that means. And it's a combination of tax liability versus legal liability and what makes sense. And if you choose this wrong structure, it can cost you a lot of money down the road. You know, I bring it up, and a lot of my examples in seminars is done because I've seen people do things wrong, what happens to them, and they wish they could have done it better to begin with. So I think of it, I know this family, for example, and they own a lot of commercial properties. So they rent it out to businesses, retail, you know, restaurants, things of that nature. And let's say they own 6 properties and they're pretty major properties and they're worth several million each. You know, the dad or the grandfather purchased them, you know, maybe 70s, 80s, you know, even 90s now. And they're holding this thing for decades. And the thing appreciates like mad. And the accountant comes back and says, you were really done with this because you put this in your personal name and you have a pretty good income. And now that you're going to want to transfer these properties over, it's going to be an issue because you want to keep it in the family. You don't want to sell it. And so you want the kids, the grandkids, et cetera, to receive it. These properties, you're going to have to take a hit here. You're going to have to actually transfer these properties to corporations because it makes more sense for you to hold this under a corporation, and you should have done that from day one. So now what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to appraise what that each property is worth at today's fair market value. You're going to have to pay land transfer tax based on it, and then put the properties in the corporations. And then when you're going to transfer the properties in the future, you're going to transfer it through shares and not directly through people. People always ask me, you know, what is the way around land transfer tax? And there's very few loopholes out there. Government is not as dumb as people think they are, and they find, you know, ways over time that people are avoiding taxes, and they try to close them off. One of them is a trust agreement, where, let's say, for example, I purchase a property and I don't want to put in my name, so Sarah puts it in her name. So Sarah T puts it in her name, and we sign an agreement that it's really my property, and I'm going to put the down payment down. I'm paying all the expenses, but on the registration it shows Sarah. So, but on taxes it's me. So that is one way people can do that, and the other way is holding it in the corporation, the property in the corporation, and transfer the shares. So when you transfer the shares, you don't have to pay land transfer tax because the corporation that owns it still owns it. The ownership hasn't changed. So it's a really, really good tax planning, estate planning technique. But again, when I get in these agreements, people are just so gung-ho. They're like, I want to close. I want to do it right now. I tell them, think it through. You know, are you going to put in your name only? Okay, you're a couple. Do you really want to have it, you know, as partners? You want to actually register a partnership, perhaps, maybe speak to your accountant that might work for you. Having as a corporation can be often very, very advantageous. And as well, it's not as far as the business structure, the ownership, the joint venture doesn't technically own it, but you could have it as a corporation owning it and people owning shares in the corporation, and they're doing a joint venture. They're doing a business together where they're saying, we bought this property, this corporation owns it, we own the corporation, and here's how we're going to decide how we're going to make our decisions, etc. So different ways to have your structure. Each can have advantages, disadvantages, but again, really think it through, and note that if you're going to be obtaining a mortgage, which most people will, you do have to speak to your mortgage representative, making sure that the mortgage jives with how you're going to take title to the property. Title to the property and the names on the mortgage have to match. People ask me that all the time. So that is not an option. One of the questions Raj was asking was directionary title. So let's say you put one name on the agreement and you're saying, I want to close it in a different name at the end of it. So Jonathan signs the agreement and we're going to close it under Sarah. So I'm just going to sign a directionary title as Jonathan, saying we're closing the property under Sarah, done deal. If we're doing a cash deal, yes, we could do that. So sometimes people don't want the seller to know who's purchasing the property, so they put as one name on the agreement. And then they do a directionary title and saying, well, you already agreed to this, so you have to close under this name. So I know you didn't want to do business with the person or you weren't aware, but I'm the name buyer. I'm still on the hook to the end. But when we close it, we're closing a different name. The issue with that is that banks don't tend to like that at all. Banks are saying, I'm going to lend money to you. I want this thing as clean as possible. I want the agreement in the name of the person or entity that I'm going to give the mortgage to. So I want an amendment to the transaction. I want an amendment saying that we changed the name on the agreement, which means the buyer and the seller have to sign that.
Can I just step in and ask a quick question?
Anytime. Anybody can step in anytime. Sure.
Regarding the trust. So you mentioned you can put it in someone else's name. You do that in minor children's name? Like, does it make sense to sort of direct people, like, say you want to buy a home, a family home? Eventually that home is going to either pass on to the kids or whatever. Would it be prudent or advisable or even feasible to put the minor child's name on title, even though they won't have anything to do with the payments?
Number one, you can't put the minor on title. They can't own property unless they're 18 plus.
18, okay.
Number two, when we do the trust agreement, and you can certainly speak to an accountant on this to verify, but the way I've explained to it is very, very simple. So if the adult buys a property and say they're holding it for the child is the real beneficiary. So that would be saying that the child put down the down payment. It was always the child's property. The adult was simply, the trustee holding as a bare person, but all the money, everything belonged to the beneficiary. You can't say that the money belonged to the child because the child didn't have that money.
Yeah.
So that's why it's not going to work. But you can speak to your accountant on something called a family trust, where you can have minor children and saying that over time, assets are being held and in trust for the children, eventually is going to pass through to them. That is a tax planning technique. That's a more complex agreement. And that's something you'd have to speak about with an accountant, but that is an option as well.
And is that done at purchase time, or can that be done after the
family
fact?
Trust can be done anytime. And if you are being told by your client, the purchaser, and whatever the kind of property is, which we'll talk about in a second, but they're telling you, you know what, I am going to be closing this in a different entity, you need to have an assignment clause in the agreement. It has to say in there that the seller acknowledges that the person purchasing can assign it to a third party, another corporation, a family member, whatever is put in there. So that way it forces the seller that they have to sign the amendment. Otherwise, the seller doesn't have to sign the amendment. And if you're having a mortgage and the mortgage requires the amendment, we're going to have a problem here. So that's why we have to have that clause ahead of time. The key being the clause at the end of the assignment saying, but the buyer herein will stay responsible as a buyer until closing, or the named buyer is hereby released once it's assigned to the new buyer. So if I'm the buyer, I want to be released. Certainly. Once I assign this to the next party, I'm out of here. You can't go after me. If I'm the seller, I'm saying, you know what, my deal's with you. So fine, I'll let you assign it to the other person. But if they don't close, I still want to go after you. So that's key point to note. So unfortunately, as professionals, people don't always read their clauses. So one thing I advise agents, don't just use a cookie cutter template, ask for an assignment clause and just throw it in, because you may be putting in a clause that is contrary to the interests of your particular client. I've had seller agents, listing agents, and I tell them, this is a great clause if you were acting for the buyer, not for the seller. And assignments is a whole other, like, general, as far as new construction assignments, but people just slapping together clauses in there, and, one can counter the other. So make sure you read it through. If you're not sure, don't have the client sign it until the lawyer reviews it, or put a lawyer review clause in there, please.
We have a question regarding clauses. Is there a way to get an actual, like, a good wording for a clause that would help us sorry, one moment. So FIFA wants to know, is there true wording for a clause that allows our buyers to change the title? Is there anywhere we can pull that from? That's good?
Yes, there's one of two ways to do that. Absolutely. You enroll into law school and spend 3 years at law school, then article, and then become a lawyer. That's one really good way of doing it. The other one is to call me or another lawyer that you're comfortable with and say, chosen lawyer, Jonathan, please, this is my scenario. I need help with wording. I would message you back and forth. And then I'd be sending you, I'd either have a clause or I'd put together a clause for you. Check with the lawyer.
Yeah.
Very important.
Because it's all dependent on the situation and the scenario that's in front of you, right?
Everything depends on scenarios. It's like no different than when someone says to me, oh, my client's purchasing, how much do you charge? And I tell them, do you go down to the car dealership and ask, I want to buy a car. Just what's the cost? I need to know, are you buying an SUV? Are you buying a sports sedan? You know, are you want brand new? Do you want resale? What's the price? No different than, you know, if I go and retain an agent, I want to sell my home. What do you charge? You're not flat fee, right? You're based on percentage. So you're going to ask, okay, is it a house? Is it a condo? What is the selling price? So there's various factors that go into determination. So everything is variable at the end of the day. So the key is to know your client, to know the situation, ask the probing questions, and then you can get them the right facts and the right clauses, certainly.
Yeah, fantastic. And the fact that you just have to be aware that you have to make sure that it's a good, well-written clause that covers the scenario. I think you're ahead of the game. You're ahead of a lot of agents in that situation.
I will tell you all that, you know, so I've been practicing now for 20 years, close to 20 years, and all professionals in any industry are not always created equal. Don't kid yourself. So, you know, because in the scenario for a realtor, for example, in a brokerage, I tell them, think about this. You know, is a realtor that's done this for 6 months the same that's done it for 16 years? Probably not. Have you sold how many 5 million plus properties? How many transactions have you done in your life? Then you start going through accountants, through lawyers. It's the same thing. So I will have a tax scenario, for example, and I will have somebody come back to me and tell me, I went to my accountant and they told me this. And I'm like, wow, okay. Have they ever done real estate before? Well, they said not really. So, you know, would you go to the foot doctor for your ear? If you're going to go to an accountant, it's not just going to an accountant. It's, do you understand real estate transactions? Do you interact with real estate transactions? Do you deal with U.S. citizens, with foreign buyers? Do you get how the tax system works? Do you correspond with CRA directly? Have you applied for HST rebates? I'd be asking these kind of probing questions to know, does this person understand my scenario? If this is a person that just, you know, is basically like H&R Block and just filing people's simple returns, but has never actually dealt with real estate, that's a scary proposition. As the transactions get more complex, and especially when you start getting into investing, we need to have good professionals all around. We have to have 2 good lawyers, 2 good agents. We need to have a good account in place, because if one professional is dropping the ball, they could ruin it for everybody simply because the person is not getting the right advice. And I can definitely tell you that I've had people come and tell me that, you know, I spoke to my neighbor, I spoke to this person, and they told me that there isn't an HST issue, don't worry about it. And I said, what do they do for a living? Oh, you know, they're a plumber. I said, they may be very good at plumbing, but I wouldn't be going to the plumber for the HST advice. Same way I wouldn't go to the accountant for the plumbing advice, you know? So really, really, you know, and that's where when you work together with a professional and you have a team, this is where when the client comes on board, it makes life a lot easier because we have the team that work together. I know for myself, when I know who the agent is, I know who the mortgage broker is, I know who the accountant is, we can talk the same language, we can get things done. When somebody new comes to the party and they don't understand what we're playing here and trying to bring them up to speed, that could be an issue. And if they don't understand it or give faulty advice, that makes all our jobs as professionals much, much harder. So that's why making sure we have the right professionals on board with us from day one helps us in getting these kind of transactions closed, because as we're talking about investments, the complexities can go up, 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 up. Jumping into the type of properties now. So there is no cookie cutter one type of property. Any property, don't kid yourself, can be an investment property. You know, people think it's either multi-unit res or commercial space. No, it's not that simple. You know, it could be as simple as a duplex, a triplex, a property with a basement apartment. And you do have to start looking at the kind of properties as there's different types of uses. There could be a mixed use property. So you could have commercial at the bottom and residential on top. We have to start thinking of different issues with this. Is the property being able to be used for that purpose? Is it legal or not? What is the zoning for the property? What is our purchaser intending to use the property for? And does that allow? So I remember one that somebody wanted to buy a big house on a major street. I believe it was in Mississauga, if I'm not mistaken. And they wanted to open up a doctor's office in it. Well, you have to search through the zoning on it. And when they went down to the city, and I told the purchaser, you're not going to do this until you take your consultant and you're going to go down to the city and you're going to go to the building department, get the zoning of it, and let's read through it. And there was a lot of commercial use allowed because you drive up and down the street, it's all commercial property. It looks like residential houses, but it's all commercial properties. Doctor office was allowed, but you're limited to the amount of staff you can have in there, how many patients at a time, parking. These were big considerations for them. And so they'd have a very limited use of their business. So that wasn't going to work for them. People purchase properties for their own use, plus they're going to rent it out. And that happens in industrial and commercial. But you have to be very, very careful because there is requirements and as far as zoning goes. And, more and more we're having, commercial condominium units. So it's a case where condominiums are not just for residential, they could be for commercial as well. And the idea being is then that same way you would in residential, that you're paying a condo fee every month. So you have less headaches, the condo corp is taking care of certain things for you. But then you have to read through the rules and regulations, the bylaws, and understand, can I buy this property? What can I do with it? What my restrictions are? Because it's very different when you have a condo versus, your own property, because you may be limited in the type of tenants you could put in there, what their uses are. The Airbnb stuff is always coming up time and time again. And people have to be very careful because most people using their properties for Airbnb aren't necessarily allowed to do that. Could be a zoning restriction, could be in the condominium rules, bylaws. So be very, very careful of that. So first of all, even if you're allowed to do a short-term versus a long-term rental and how you're going to structure it. And then it's a very, very different creature as well. Are you ready, to pull up your pants and become a landlord? Are you ready to take on tenants of any kind of degree? And it's one thing when I have a property and, you sign a 1-year lease and you bought a new construction condo, you're never going to live in there. You signed a 1-year lease, tenant, here's the keys, good luck. You pay me the monthly rent. I'm going to pay the condo fees. I'm going to pay the taxes. I'm going to pay the mortgage. Pretty hands-off tenancy there. Any issues come up, it's still new construction. So hopefully there's Terry on. Otherwise, you may have to go get a plumber. You may have to get an electrician. But, when you have a property of a different size and age, and if there's multiple tenants, you're going to have many different considerations of whether that kind of property will work for you. So when you're bringing a person into investing in real estate, we need to kind of work backwards in it. I would be telling them, what is your end game? What do you picture yourself owning? And what is the purpose of it? And are you ready to do this kind of stuff? And we'll walk through those considerations. But again, many of them are not legal considerations. They're actually business considerations. But if they're coming to me as a professional, as a lawyer, I have to raise these things still. I have the responsibility the same way you would, because if you're not taking them to a lawyer or an accountant and you don't raise these points, you're the one that was held that should have raised it. So, and even if they are going to lawyer and accountant, anytime as a realtor, I always mention, think of it this way. When the client goes to speak to their lawyer or accountant, they will inevitably come back to you. There's something about the agent-client relationship, which is very, very special. And clients really, really, really rely upon you. They won't go to the bathroom without asking you. And when they'll come back from the meeting with the lawyer and they'll say, oh, we ran through these scenarios, what do you think about it? I trust you. If you tell them, I don't understand how that works exactly, I can't help you, they're going to say, wow, maybe I'll find a realtor who does. So if you're going to be helping clients working through investments, you should know it yourself, including that you'll probably be doing this yourself one day. I can't tell you how many professionals of all levels, if you're touching real estate, the urge is there to be involved in real estate. So mortgage brokers purchasing properties, realtors purchasing properties. So people of all walks of life can be investors themselves. So when you're thinking of these things, when you're working through with clients, think I could be in these shoes as well. It could be my parents, it could be my friends. So there's many people we could be assisting with these type of properties. So again, note any property is pretty much up for grabs as an investment. Any questions so far?
Yeah, we had a question from Raj, and
Raj is a popular guy.
Raj, he likes to get in there, which is fantastic.
Good stuff,
So
Raj.
I'm just going to read it.
Please.
If the entity that you are directing title to, such as a corporation or another person, has their own financing through their own lender or side agreement, do you find that they will still need an amendment executed with the vendor rather than the original purchaser and the new entity?
Do you think
and then he laughs because he's not sure if that even makes sense. So I'll leave it to you because that doesn't make sense.
Okay, let me ask you: is Raj a shy guy, or do you think if we asked him to unmute?
Raj can unmute himself. Raj.
Hey, yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Raj.
Would you like to clarify?
Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much. I asked the question earlier when you were talking about an amendment possibly needing to be signed.
Okay.
So that's what I was referring to when I was asking, is that amendment that, you said the lenders don't usually like, is that an amendment between the vendor and the original purchaser, or the original purchaser and the new entity, whether it's a corporation or an individual?
Okay. So two things there. Very good questions. So on any kind, and Raj brings up a good point here, because on assignments, it can be, usually we think of them as new construction. So I go sign a deal with a builder to go buy a new construction unit. And then I talk with Raj. Raj is like, I really want that unit. I'll buy it off you. So Raj and I make our side deal, our assignment agreement, and then we have to go to the builder for consent. Raj, that's so you're basically like same scenario on even resale. Do we want that side deal between you and I? Is that enough for the lender, or do we need that consent, right?
Right.
So what I want you to think of it, it's pretty similar. So instead of a consent, all we're asking the seller, the original seller, to sign is an amendment to their deal, because what's happening from the mortgage point of view, they're working on two deals here. They have the assignment agreement between you and I, and then they're also working off the original agreement with the builder. There's a gap there because the original agreement is in one name. Now they're lending money to the new entity. They want that original agreement to be in the name of the new entity as well. So they need that consent. So instead of a consent, we're getting an amendment. That's what you have to think of. So we need that amendment, because sometimes we may not even have a side deal, right? We may just say, you know what? I'm a good guy, Raj, we'll just amend the deal. It's yours. Have a nice day. May not be the smartest thing from a tax planning from what an account tells you, but as far as from a mortgage point of view, the key is that amendment. So the amendment between the original buyer, the original seller, and changing the names over. That's what we need for the mortgage, my understanding.
Got it. And if I could just ask a follow-up?
Anything, go for it.
Awesome. So now let's say, because I've been hearing more and more people directing title, they don't have an assignment amendment included in their agreement, and they're saying, okay, you know what? That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to, go to my lawyer at the time of closing and direct title. Sure. And that should be enough. And that's, I guess, also the same thing that I was looking for in terms of, is that an amendment that you can do on the side kind of thing, where if they have their own financing, they can present to their lenders, or is that not a thing that you would recommend?
Okay, there we go. That's the point that I'm stuck on. Please define for us having your own financing.
So let's say you've purchased a home from a builder, for example.
Okay.
And you're the original purchaser.
Yep.
And now that you decide that, okay, before closing, I don't have an assignment included in my agreement. Mm-hmm. I want to take advantage of this market and I want to sell it before closing. I don't want to close this property. And you find someone that wants to take it off your hands, kind of thing. And what I'm hearing from people, they don't have an assignment clause, but they keep mentioning, oh, I'm just going to direct it at the time of closing through my lawyer. Is that even a thing?
So new construction, 99.99% of builders are not accepting a directionary title. No. So okay. New construction, resale, very different creatures. Okay. We have a lot more freedom on resale. So on resale, by all means, so I buy the under my name, the agreement is there. and I signed a directionary title. Roger's closing it, resale done. Come back with the builder. If it was new construction, builder saying, I'm not going to allow that. Read your agreement. I have to deal with one person. I'm closing with them, and you guys figure it out. And part of it is because when you start getting new construction, you got HST rebate and all sorts of lovingness. The builder saying, I'm not getting involved with that as far as who actually bought it, who owned it. I have a deal with one person. That's what I'm closing with. That's my only obligation. I don't have to accept the directionary title. Some will accept the directionary title, but they make it clear you have to sign a directionary title prior or on occupancy closing. So once occupancy closing happened, you cannot change title. So we have to read through the purchase agreement with the builder and seeing if a directionary title is even available. And in most cases, it is not.
That makes it clear. Thank you so much.
No problem. Because assignments at the end of the day, you know, I can't tell you how many dozens, maybe 100 times I've given seminars on assignments, and I love it. They call me the assignment king of Toronto, but I do a lot more things than assignments. But it's because people are really scared of assignments, and it's like the assignment boogeyman, you know, a boogie woman. But it's not that bad. Once you understand that there's certain issues and you have to work through certain issues, it's actually not that bad. But people get really intimidated by it because you got these giant builder agreements, you got disclosure packages, and then you have the assignment agreement itself and trying to do the calculations and working through tax ramifications. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And especially when you're doing them as real estate investments. So it's one thing when you go to purchase new construction and you're going to live in there yourself or an immediate family member, done, easy. Once you start adding complexities to it, that you want to assign it to somebody and flip it, or you want to hold on to it as an investment, there are different considerations there, which we will talk about momentarily, actually. Any other questions?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Raj. If there's any other questions, feel free again to put it in the chat, or when I pause, just, unmute yourself and start yelling. It's all good. So I purposely put joint ventures in the middle of this because I think that is the sexiest part of real estate investing right now. People love to hear the word joint venture, like, ooh, that sounds, very, very classy. It sounds like it's gonna make me a lot of money. So I want a joint venture. That's for me. So I could give just on joint ventures, we could be doing a week-long seminar, but I'm giving you just everything I'm planting here is kind of like seeds just to think about. I'm not expecting this to be the all-encompassing Bible. This is not a 1,000-page document. This is key issues to consider in it. Once you know that issue, many other issues can arise, certainly, but this at least gets the conversation going. And these can be hard, dead stops for people knowing these things, or they can be interested and keep going. And once they find their consideration of an issue, then we can dig deeper into it. So this is more grazing the surface than anything else, but it is still high-level items to consider. And, one thing in joint venture is, first and foremost, are you going to be living there yourself at any point? Are you living there and renting it at the same time? Thinking about that. Choosing your partner wisely. A really, really good way to end a friendship, a really, really good way to stop talking to a family member is to go into business with them. That's a really, really awesome way to do that. That can sever things really, really quickly. I have seen all sorts of interesting scenarios where people band together and are saying, I want to go into business with this person. And I think this is fantastic. If you think about what a business relationship looks like, it's not that much different than a personal relationship. It's amazing how people will jump in to buy a house with somebody, but they wouldn't marry them personally. But there are the same considerations. What are we bringing to the table? How is this relationship going to be governed? If we want to split away from each other, how do we do that? What if expenses come up? There's so many things that can come up that way. And people don't put these things in the writing, which is scary because everything's great when things are great. But if there's a situation that comes up, it'd be really nice to have that agreement to be able to look back to. So it's something to consider whenever you have two people or more coming together that are going to work together, buy real estate together, they should have an agreement in place to govern the relationship, which we'll talk about that. But I tell people, think about that business partner wisely. You're telling me, again, this is a legal consideration. Why are we talking about business decisions here? You as a realtor, for example, will be in a scenario that two people come together and we're buying a property. So, sign us up. Great. We'll find you a property. And then the relationship broke down and I don't like them anymore. So we don't want to close anymore. Since we can't close it together, can you just get us out of this deal? Or you know what? I'm going to close it. I'm the one that found it. Well, I'm the one to put more of the down payment down. So it's my property now. You got to deal with this. And the deal hasn't closed yet. And you know what? It's the worst. It is utterly nauseating when you get into these scenarios. You have a signed agreement. It is not closed yet. They're not talking anymore. And they're going to go into default if they don't close. And now we got to work through this because nobody bothered to talk these issues through. Nobody bothered to propose an agreement in place. And now what? Very often people will say, you know what? We'll do that later. We will absolutely get that agreement signed later when we have time for it. I'm also going to buy life insurance later, and I'm going to make a will later. And I'm going to plan, my life later because right now I'm living in the moment and I'm dealing with stuff that I'm very busy at my work and through my family. So I'm going to put up these big level things because it's not that important. Well, if you're making the biggest investment of your life and investing your life savings into this property and going to be joining up with somebody, I really think you need to think through who that person is and what we're going to do. We talked already about personal names versus corporate shares. And it can be very, very high level, folks. Like we're going to throw in a concept called holding companies. Ooh. So one person has a company, another person has a company, and they open up a third company, and each of their companies own shares in the third company, and the third company is the one that owns the real estate. Pretty cool, eh? So it sounds really high level. It is. And a lot of accountants like it for tax planning purposes. And also there's liability part of it as well from a legal standpoint. So again, type of thing to think about. And I really, again, I have to emphasize, I repeat myself a lot, I know, but it's that important. That's why I keep saying it. This is a really good conversation to have before we buy the property, not after we buy the property. It's really, really good when we can come armed to the time to sign the offer and already have the corporation in place that's going to buy it, have the agreement in place already governing the relationship between the parties. They should be doing this beforehand, not after. Opening up a bank account in their name. I can't tell you how many times people don't do that. It's really, when you're doing real estate investing, your life is a lot easier if you have a bank account where the monies go into to buy the property and monies go out for expenses, monies are collected for rent. This is where you can kind of separate everything out, do proper accounting. It makes life a lot easier. So definitely, another thing to advise, speak to your accountant, speak to your lawyer. Did you open a bank account already? Set that up. And as well, are you ready to be a manager? Are you ready to manage this thing? So very often there's an expression that says too many cooks in the kitchen, don't work out. You'll usually have the one person that's more the hands-on. I speak with the lawyer. I speak with the realtor. I'll find the property. You don't worry about that. You take care of this. You take care of that. I'm going to be more spearheading this. It's good in one hand because then you don't have to get two opinions all the time. But inevitably, the second person will eventually stand up and say, hey, I'm being taken advantage of, or hey, I'm not in the loop. I want to know now. So if you have more than one person you're involved with on a joint venture, try to get both involved so everybody's in the loop. I'm going to CC you. If you don't respond, that's your choice. But you're acting for more than one person or entity, get them both in the loop, please. So we talked about taxes.
Harsh. Sorry, Jonathan. Harsh has a question for us.
Who does?
Harsh, but I don't know. Harsh, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Just because I'm not 100% sure on what you're directly trying to get at.
Yeah. Hi. Hi, Jonathan. How are you? Good morning. Yeah.
Good morning, Harsh. Welcome to the webinar.
Yeah. Hi. So my question is that in case two partners, who bought the property together, two good friends maybe who didn't end up making any agreement with in this case, in this scenario, then if they get into any issues, will there be any default rules in this case which will be applicable?
When we encounter problems in life, especially in real estate, there's only one or two things that are going to fix it, Harsh. Either they're going to come to an agreement together or we're going to need a court order. That's it. So when you have an agreement in place, then they can try to cover as many of the scenarios as possible. So we've already pre-agreed on this so that we know the way it's going to govern. You still, if they can't agree, even if you have the agreement in place, one can stand up and say, I don't care there's the agreement in place. I'm not allowing you to do this. I forbid you from closing. I forbid you from incurring this expense. you still got to go to court, but it's a lot stronger to go to court when you're saying, here's the pre-existing agreement and this person is violating it, versus we got nothing as far as the way we're doing it. So judge, help us. So the agreement doesn't automatically make things happen, but it's certainly much easier to enforce it. But it's not, in my mind, it's not much different than, for example, when you have a couple splitting up and they're selling their matrimonial home. If they don't agree in writing through their family law lawyers how the monies are getting divided, that money is sitting and rotting in trust accounts with the lawyer, with the brokerage, until they can come to an agreement in writing or a court order. So those are the only two ways to fix problems, unfortunately.
So in this case, me as a real estate agent, I am also on hook of anything, if they didn't have any agreement, or we have to enforce the buyers. My actual buyer is, want to buy the property with real estate with one of his good friends, right? So, but as both of these are very good friends, I'm not sure, that they will go into agreement or not. So in this, I shall, try to convince them to make an agreement between each other.
Harsh, how badly do you want me to scare you today?
No, you can go ahead. I want to understand the things, right? Because these are my actual buyers. They want to, buy the property together.
Yes.
So I don't want to be in hook, and in any case, that's what I want.
None of us ever want to be on the hook, Harsh. I agree with you 1,000%. Our lives are a lot easier that way. We're not on hook on things. And the way to do that and to not, because every professional is going to be there. If you don't have that queasy feeling in your stomach one day, it means you don't have enough transactions. You do enough deals, situations will come up, and you'll say to yourself, did I mess up here? Should I have done something differently? What's going on? That's very, very common, no matter what level, what you're doing, any profession, literally. Harsh, the words that will set you free in this case is, again, you have your friend, they want to buy a property together, fantastic. And I would send them an email. It was a real pleasure, friend, to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation at Starbucks very much last night. As we discussed, you're planning to buy a property with your friend there, which is a very interesting proposition. And I'd be very happy to help you as a professional. Before going ahead with this, I heavily advise you to speak to a professional real estate lawyer and accountant as far as any potential legal and tax ramifications on this transaction. That would serve you very well, in my opinion. Then from there, when they're ready to buy and you meet with them again, they're like, okay, we're starting to look at the properties. Did you speak to the lawyer and accountant? No, we're good. Don't worry, we'll be fine. Then you send them that email. Here's the list of properties ready to take you out for viewings. As I told you previously, I really think you should speak to the lawyer and accountant, as far as a professional lawyer and accountant on real estate, to confirm your potential legal and tax ramifications. Despite my advice, you told me that you're not going to go ahead with that. But again, I'm reminding you that I think that's a very good idea. See why we did that, Harsh? So you go to court in the future and they're telling you, Harsh was not professional at all. Harsh didn't tell us to get an agreement. Harsh didn't tell us this. Harsh didn't tell us that. I did tell you that you're going to work together. There are potential accounting and legal ramifications. And I really think that you need to speak to a lawyer and accountant. And I tried twice and they really chose not to, but I tried. Versus them coming to court and saying, Harsh never told us that we could speak to an accountant lawyer. I thought we were okay. I thought we were relying on Harsh. That's what you don't want. See the difference?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So in this case, do you think WhatsApp messages or text messages will serve the purpose of emails, or emails are better?
So litigation lawyers have told me that yes, text messages, WhatsApp are accepted. In my opinion, I think the gold standard is always going to be emails. You have the nice from, to, date, boom. And especially when they respond back and they say, got you, thanks, Harsh, got your email. That's what we want. So you got to picture, my friend, that you are being sued and you're going to go to court. What are you going to express verbally? What materials can you print off and put together for your lawyer in the affidavit? And if you have some nice emails going back and forth where you gave that advice, where you suggested heavily to speak to professionals, it's going to look really, really good. When you have nothing in writing whatsoever, and it's I told them verbally, now that's not as strong.
Okay,
because
but in case if they still didn't have an agreement, because they are very good friends, like it's an actual scenario of mine,
Absolutely. I had a feeling, and we won't use their names, but go ahead.
Yeah, but in that case, do you think that I will be on hook ever, in such a case, even though I've guided them, okay, go ahead and, have an agreement, if they didn't have an agreement. So it's a pre-construction property, right? So, if I'm selling pre-construction, so in that
Yes.
case, they just sign the APS right away, they don't go into showings and anything, so
No,
it's
but
signed
even
right
okay,
away.
but did you go with them to purchase the new construction unit from the sales office? Or did they go sign it
Uh,
on their own?
no, I go. Means I went with them, obviously.
You did go with them to sign the agreement, and
Yeah, yeah,
then your liability started from the second you got in the car with them to drive to the sales office, because everything could be a potential grabs. Did you negotiate for them caps? Did you know that they were going to be assigning the unit? Did you put that through? Even did you tell them about the conditional period? Did you insist they go to a lawyer or not? So you do have a certain level from there, and then it continues, trickles down to knowing, okay, the two people together again. You're asking me like here, this is your particular scenario, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but certainly if they don't have an agreement in place and stuff happens, I will tell you this, just generally in life,
yeah.
things don't go right, especially the ones that love us the most are going to hurt us the most. And they're going to say, he was my friend. I thought I could rely on him. I thought that it was okay. He never told me this. This is the kind of stuff that starts getting spewed. So be very, very careful. Family and friends in business could be your biggest culprits, but they're also your best source because they're from your circle. But you have to give a higher standard of care when you know them, because it can burn you worse, in my opinion.
I got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, but thank you, Harsh. So other issues before drafting a joint venture agreement. So just a couple more slides on joint ventures. So taxes are a ramification. So if you're buying new construction, for example, as far as if you have a first-time buyer and they're planning to buy a new condo unit, but they're using it as an investment, they're not using it for their own use, they're not going to get the land transfer tax rebate, and then they've owned property before. So by that investment property, so now they will be disqualified for the next property, which they are for their personal use. So there's land transfer tax rebate issues on investments to consider. The HST rebate is an issue. So even if you're going to buy from the builder directly, not through assignment, if you're buying it as an investment to flip, or you're doing it as a rental, the builder will not allow the HST rebate to just flow through. So what happens on new construction, for those of you that are not doing new construction, the price is all in with HST. You go buy a new condo unit, and the builder says, there's a part of the HST that comes back from the government. It's about $24,000. I'm going to apply for it. I'm not going to charge it to you, but you have to sign some forms saying that you're allowing me to take that rebate. That's only if it's for personal use. If you're going to be renting out the unit, builder says, no. You're not going to sign off that you're living in there. I'm charging you for the rebate. You can go apply for it back yourself after closing. So there's besides land transfer tax, there's an HST issue there. We talked about the idea of becoming a landlord, which is not stomachable for everybody, which we'll talk about some more as well. Qualifying for mortgages can be very, very tricky as well, which we'll talk about. So it's very different criteria, I'm told, as far as for personal use versus an investment. So there's additional costs as far as possible PBSA registrations. There's the assignment of rents. They're going to get registered as well. So there's going to be more documentation from the mortgage side of things. The rates are going to be different. So there are considerations for people. They need to tell their lender what they're planning to use the property for, so they know what they're paying on their mortgages. Are you planning to construct at all? Renovate? As a joint venture, two friends coming together, let's renovate together. We have no experience in renovations. That should be a lot of fun to put together. So, sorry?
Can I interject? Can I just ask a
Please.
quick question here?
Sure. Absolutely.
A lot of these questions would be answered once you've actually looked at a property and want to buy that property. But I would imagine that, just as an example, Harsh's situation,
Yes.
they just went into the sales office. They decided that this was the property they were going to buy.
Yep.
With the markets the way they are, people are, put in a position where they have to sign right away. Is it possible to do a joint venture agreement in advance before you have any property that you're actually looking to purchase, so that in a situation like that, you can make the offer and go in and purchase, and you already have that agreement sort of in the background?
Okay, think of it this way. Two people are going to get married. Are they better off doing the marriage contract before they get married or after they get married, do you think?
Obviously before.
Right. So that's where I tell people. So the reason I bring it up is always when you're doing a business relationship, think what you would do in a personal relationship. It's the same principles. You're going to do a joint venture with somebody. You're way better off having it all set out beforehand, having a joint venture agreement, and just fill in the name, the address of the property when you actually buy the property. Yes,
Which is,
1000%.
yeah, that's what I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying to do, because I just didn't know if you could actually do the agreement without having the property sort of included as part of
Yeah.
it.
So I've had scenarios where I've had, youngsters going and buying properties and buddies, and then, it's a week off from closing. Oh, I think we should have an agreement. I thought about it. So can you guys just draft one up really quickly for us? And then we're starting to negotiate it out. And then when we're acting for two parties, tell them, there's a conflict there. So we can't hold anything in confidence. You can't tell me something that the other person's not supposed to know. So it's either open and transparent or it's not at all. And it's a nightmare if they should have done it earlier. So the sooner you draft it, the better, and better to have it in place even before buying the property, fine during the process. And then as you close the property, every day after that becomes harder and harder to sign agreement for sure. In a joint venture, you have to think of, again, and everything you do in life, you got to think about your end game and work your way backwards. So what is the intention with the property? Are you going to hold on to it long term? Is somebody going to buy somebody out? Are you going to flip it? What's going on? We have to, now things will change. I get that. But if you have if you're very certain of what you're going to do, you're much better positioned to plan from taxes. Now, even though, obviously the laws can change and the regulations can change. So the way, now will be taxed could be very different the way we'll be taxed in 10, 20 years. But some properties can be grandfathered depending on when they were bought, when they were sold. So that's a potential as well. But you try to make the best scenario for yourself. So if you have a very good idea what you're planning to do with the property long term, make your plan with your accounting lawyer. That way, you're likely going to make the best tax plan you can. And we talked about trust agreements, that is always up for grabs as well. Last part on joint ventures is simply just to prepare the agreement. And boom, we got to know who the parties are, who's putting in what amount of dollars or percentages, how are we sharing our profits, how are we sharing our costs, how do we deal with disputes, people going to default. So somebody's not putting up their share, we have to fix the roof all of a sudden, and somebody put in more money. Are they taking more of the share all of a sudden? Is it a loan to the person? We have to figure that part out. If somebody wants to buy somebody out, or maybe we're going to put in that this thing has to be sold within a certain amount of time, we need protection in there as much as possible. Was there any other questions on joint ventures at this stage before we jump to our next part? So we all should be experts now, understanding that, again, many different properties we can use for investments, different ways to set up the structure of holding the properties. It could be various people involved, entities involved, and we should have an agreement in place as far as governing our relationship. From there, plan your mortgage. It's amazing. People just take it for granted. I make a good income and there's a lot of equity in this property, so I can just buy as many properties as I want as investments. It doesn't work like that. Lenders look at how many properties you're holding, how much debt you have, ratios and things like that. Some people can't even buy a second property. They barely can buy a first property. And guess what? You have to have a bigger down payment. It's not the same down payment rules on investments as your primary residence. You may not be able to get that A lender. You may have to go to a private lender. Okay. And there are considerations then when you start getting into private mortgages where they're saying, okay, I'm only going to give you a 1-year mortgage. I'm going to charge you a 1% fee for the lender as far as from the total amount you're borrowing. 1% of that is charged as a fee to the lender, 1% to the broker, and we're charging you 10% of interest, and it's a 1 year only. What are you going to be doing in the 1 year's time? Do you have to go to a different lender and do that all over again? So I would be saying, if we're going to be doing this investment idea, know first of all that we're going to have the financing in place. Plan that first and foremost, because if we can't get money, then all of this is just a giant waste of time. So let's first know how we're going to get our money, how that's going to work. Then let's put our agreement together. Then let's get the property. So if we're going to go 1A, 1B, the mortgage is up there big time. Budget, budget, budget. Again, we're saying this is the legal ramifications. This legally, business-wise, affects all of us because not only are you a realtor, you're also expected to be a quasi lawyer, a quasi accountant. So doing the math ahead of everybody should be doing math with the clients. It should be the realtor, the mortgage broker, the lawyer, understanding how much money, first of all, do we need to budget to close the transaction? So understand, here's how much the property costs, understanding as far as land transfer tax goes, lawyer fees, title insurance. So budgeting that part of it. So do we first of all have enough money to close? Because how much money is going to come in from the mortgage? And do we have enough from the down payment side to be able to cover that? But from there, maybe you can close, but can you carry the thing every month? Is there tenants in there? Is it carrying itself from how much you're paying on your mortgage? Are you going to have to add in money? How much? Are you living in there? Who's covering utilities? You have to cover up. You have to make a budget at the end of the day. You have to make a business plan to understand, do we have money to close? Do we have money to carry the thing? Budget for a rainy day. Make your reserve fund. Imagine you're a condo corp. Imagine the roof's going to cave in. Imagine you got to do the driveway. Where's that money going to come from? So you don't put any money away. You're leveraged to the max on your mortgage. You don't have a line of credit and something's caving in. What are you going to do? Now you're going to have to go and get a line of credit. You have to go refinance again and pull out the equity from the house. Try to avoid that. So again, figure out, where monies are going to come from. So when anything you're putting towards, what often, when you have like a partnership or corp that is dealing with a property, when they're having money every month, there's a bank account, they're putting money off to the side. So that money is either going to be used towards this property. Maybe they're going to do construction. Maybe they have to do renovations, or they're putting the pool together of profits to buy the next property. Are you ready to be a landlord? This is, for many people, can't stomach the idea of it. So dealing with people, dealing with contractors, non-paying tenants, how do you get them out? I just actually got a message this morning that there's a webinar they're doing on landlord tenant, and they want me to come speak on that. And what I'll tell you is, first and foremost, if you don't understand any of that stuff, is first of all, what type of property is it? Is it residential or is it commercial? Very different creatures if it's a residential commercial property as far as dealing with tenants go. And the Residential Tenancies Act used to be called the Tenant Protection Act in Ontario. So think about that for a second. The Tenant Protection Act, not the Landlord Protection Act, but the Tenant Protection Act. So you want to be a landlord in residential, you're dealing with law that was designed to protect tenants. Know that. Don't delude yourself with that. There's a lot of good materials online, because you have the Ontario Tribunal dealing with residential landlords and tenants, and there's a frequent asked questions section for landlords and tenants. If you're thinking about buying a property as investment, or your client is, and they're saying, how does it work? Oh, I have to sign besides the OREA form for the short lease, I have to sign the government form too. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. If I want to get a tenant out who's in there, but they're paying the rent, how do they do that? I have a tenant that's not paying rent. What do I do? I have a tenant that's causing disturbance all the time. There's really good material on that. And if you do have to come to the point that you're pulling somebody out, I recommend always to use a paralegal that's just specialized, and all they do is go to the tribunal all day, because it's a very specialized area. If you've read in the media, they try to scare you that, residential tenants have a lot of rights. It's not so easy to get them out. And, it is their homes. We shouldn't be able to just boot people out of their homes at free will. So things to consider. But, when you start dealing with commercial tenancies, for example, the lease is at an end. There's no automatic right of renewal. So you build up a business, you sign a 5-year lease, no right of renewal. 5 years is done, you're out the door. Residential, as long as you're paying the rent, unless the landlord has a reason under law that they can move in, like for example, for their own use, or if they sold the property and the purchaser is going to use the property, there's very limited rights on residential. So very different creatures. So if you are planning to become a landlord, and you are assuming tenants, as a realtor, be very, very careful. It's on the residential side, I rarely see good clauses in the agreements. And in commercial, I have good to decent clauses. But if you're going to assume a tenant, whether it's residential or commercial, the mentality you'd have in commercials, for sure, I'd have all those clauses in there to make sure to protect my client. You should be having the same clauses in the agreement to protect your client, assuming a residential tenant, as far as the lease being in good standing, as far as the rent adjustments on closing, and so forth. So there are considerations in place, and we can help you with those clauses. But if you know you're assuming a tenant on an existing property, that should bring a giant red flag. Bring the lawyer immediately into it. It is a legal issue. Preparing a lease. I get asked this all the time. So my client's buying a residential property, a house. There's an existing tenant in there. They're on a month-to-month lease. The written lease expired long ago. So I can make them sign my new lease, right? Nope. You can't force them to sign nothing. So you're assuming that month-to-month tenant the way it is. And if they had a beef with the landlord and they were suing the landlord and you don't have any protection measures in your agreement, when you take over that tenancy, that landlord issue becomes your issue now as the buyer. So it can be very, very scary. So on that token, if it's a vacant property and you are planning to put a tenant in there in the future and your client comes to you, it's interesting. Again, I love working with realtors and I love educating so that you all can be the best that you can be. And that's why you have to understand, as a real estate commercial lawyer, why is he doing leases? Why is he involved in corporations? Because if you're going to start getting into investment property as a realtor helping your client, you have to understand that corporations do come into play here, that they're going to need help finding tenants, whether it's residential or commercial tenants. Are you equipped to be able to help your client find those type of tenants? If you are not, what will happen is that probably somebody else will help them find that tenant. And when they do help them find that tenant, they'll probably help them buy the next property, So if we're going to work with clients and we're going to give them the opportunity to invest in real estate and be professionals, our responsibility at the end of the day, from the client's point of view, is try to be as one-stop shop as possible. If I work on a closing of a transaction for a commercial property, but I can't help them with a commercial lease, then when they do the commercial lease with another lawyer, they're probably going to a different lawyer when it's time to close the next transaction. They're saying, oh, wow, they do the lease and that. So think about it. And if you're not done leases, I would definitely mentor or partner up with another realtor that does it. And so that way we can work together and assist this client, because especially ones that, are new investors and never were landlords before, they need a lot of guidance. They need a lot of help, and put in lawyer review clauses all the time so we can help them through in creating leases, whether it's a residential or a commercial tenancy. They will need help in putting together leases, deciding if they're assuming they're going to be using short-term, long-term tenants, understanding those ramifications. And like we talked about, are they ready to be a landlord? Are they ready to be a property manager? Some investors hire a property management company, pay them the monthly fee, they collect the rent, they make sure the property is in good standing, they charge it back to the landlord, but then the investor is more hands off, but that's coming out of their pocket by having to pay somebody to do it.
Yes. Hi, Jonathan. I was having one question.
Harsh, is that you?
Yeah. This is Harsh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So in case, me as a landlord, if I have signed a proper lease with my tenant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So after around 4 or 6 months, he has lived into my property.
Mm-hmm.
He said that, okay, I'm not having job anymore and I'm not able to pay. So do we have a right to, evacuate that property or move him out of the property?
Okay.
If he's not paying
So
them, because
this is a residential tenant that's not paying. Okay. So you have a residential tenant, you signed a 1-year lease, I would presume, and 6 months in they lost their job and saying, I can't pay anymore.
Yeah.
So I would talk to the tenant and, let's assume no COVID right now and there's no restrictions, like everything is open season, which I understand it is. So everything is what it should be. So if there's an issue with the tenant, they're not paying, then you can go to the tribunal. Unfortunately, life is not always fair for people. And if money's not there, you feel for them. But on the same token, you have a contract, they're supposed to pay, they're not paying. As a landlord, I'm going to retain a paralegal. I'm going to file the notice of failure to pay rent with the tribunal. They're going to order at some point an appearance. Tenant can come in and say, I lost my job. I'm sorry, but I have nowhere to live. And then they're going to deal with it. That's why I do not get into that side of it. I have not walked into the tribunal. I never plan on going to the tribunal because it's not fun to do that. It's really not fun to make somebody homeless. But on the same token, people forget, they look at it from that end. That landlord is not always a giant corporation with oodles of money and is just laughing all the way to the bank. Very often, it's that investor that went and have a job and saved every penny they had of their life to buy that property. They need that rent money in order to carry their mortgage, property tax, etc. That tenant stops paying. That landlord has to cover the difference, and they may not have that money themselves. They have a family, and they're just getting by. And instead of putting money into stocks and bonds, they put it in real estate, and they're depending on that money to carry their business. And otherwise, they could be bankrupt. So it goes both ways, So at the end of the day, that's why we have procedures in place. And the only thing I would say is just don't leave it for long. If they fail to pay rent, you speak to the paralegal. You file that notice right away with the tribunal, and then you go off to the races to figure out. During COVID, it was much harder, obviously, because of the people's situations, and there was a freeze on there. And now I understand it's different.
But what does standards say in this case? Who will win the situation? If they don't pay, okay, if I still file a complaint on a paralegal, if they didn't act for another 6 months, maybe I can't keep on sitting for, 6 months with no payments, right?
All I can tell you is from a general point of view, you go to the tribunal, judge or adjudicator says, are you paying it? No. Like if the tenant shows up to the hearing and brings the money and says, here, rent's in good standing, they're not going anywhere. Okay. They have no money. They're not paying. At some point, there's going to be an order. No, you're not failed to pay rent. So you're out. They're going to get the sheriff. They're going to do the eviction process. So that is there. For specific instances, I'm going to put the disclaimer because I don't go to the tribunal. I've never had to evict a tenant once, and I never will. That'll be a paralegal question to answer. But I will tell you that there is notices in place, and one of them is for failure to pay rent. The same way in commercial, when you have a commercial lease, there's a rental default and there's a default for everything else. Failure to pay rent, you read through the lease. Do you have to give written notice of that? Not give notice of that? And then from there, are you giving them the termination? It's much easier to terminate somebody on commercial than it is on residential because that is somebody's home. So the guidelines and the rules are much stricter on residential for the most part.
And what about the second scenario is, what about if this guy files a bankruptcy? Do we have a right to still evacuate the property? If the guy files a bankruptcy, he doesn't have any money to pay.
So, right. So my understanding, it's going to be the same process. You're going to go to this tribunal, file the same form notice for failure to pay, whatever the person's scenario is. It comes down to the fact that they haven't paid the rent. So you just have to follow those guidelines, but it's not so easy. And you've seen in the media probably that there's people that work the system. They know how to pay just enough. They know how to cause delays, so there are professional time wasters out there. But for the most part, somebody doesn't pay the rent, you do the proper forms, you get the sheriff, eventually you are going to get the unit back.
Perfect.
And so I would just tell this person, make sure you're dealing with a paralegal or lawyer that knows the tribunal, that goes there, that has evicted people before, that they understand it. Don't bring in a hack, bring in somebody that actually understands it.
Yeah, I got it. And third scenario is supposedly the tenant is breaking something inside the property, like breaking the walls or maybe any equipment over there, whatever is being rented, do we have a right to still evacuate? And if the guy is not listening, there are such instances,
Same thing like residential commercial, there's failure to pay rent and there's failure for everything else. So you can have scenarios, they're breaking down walls, they're growing illegal drugs, they're got dangerous dogs in there that's biting people, they are making horrible sounds and they're scaring people. Whatever it be, there's the rent and there's the catch-all otherwise. So if this person is, you've gone as a landlord to verify the unit and you're seeing that they're physically breaking down the walls and you're taking pictures and the place is in complete disrepair, then you're going to file a different notice. So there is provision in there. This is why it's also good to have a proper lease in place. So you're not going just based on what the law says, but going in addition to it. It's not overriding it, but it's not contrarying it. But there's an elaboration as far as what the responsibilities of the tenant were in the lease itself. So you can point to the lease. So it's stronger than having a verbal lease and having to just rely what's in the act. So that's where,
Yeah.
again, having a good lease in place will help a landlord if their tenant is defaulting or damaging the property, certainly.
Yeah, and one more scenario, in case 12 months
Harsh
lease
is
has
the land of
expired.
scenarios. I call it the what if game. And when I have clients that bring me that, I tell them we could play the what if game all day long. Bring me an actual scenario when it's actually happening and we'll deal with it. Because as soon as one thing changes, it could change the whole answer. But go ahead, Harsh. I have a feeling these are real scenarios, though.
Yeah, so the 12-month lease expires, and if the tenant doesn't want to sign the another for the second year, do we have a process to vacate this
This is a
tenant?
residential tenant?
Residential tenant I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yes. As we talked about, the residential tenant is under no obligation to sign anything. They can go month to month indefinitely for the rest of their lives, and you're keeping them. There's nothing you could do with it unless you have one of the provisions of how you're allowed to get them out. One of them is you're planning to move in there personally or immediate family member. You have a purchaser of the property that wants to take over the property. There's very limited scenarios of how we're able to take over these properties. But if you have one of those and it's month to month, then you can give them the 60 days notice and do that. But otherwise, the tenant is under no obligation to sign any lease extensions or new lease whatsoever.
I got it. And in case I was a realtor in this case, I'm not the
Yes.
landlord and I'm a realtor.
Yes.
So am I on hook of all such situations?
Yeah. I know what you're saying. It's I'm never gonna be able to give you that blanket beautifulness. Yes, you're off the hook, Harsh. You did all you could, because I don't know if you did all you could, because people can claim anything they want, even if it's not true, even if you think you did everything possible, because they can come back and say, Harsh never told me I should get a criminal check. Harsh never told me to do an income verification. Harsh never told me that I should go and call up their employer and get a verification on them. I didn't know that I can call their last landlord and get a reference. So their credit score. So yes, I mean, people, when you're acting as a realtor, if you're assisting a landlord and you haven't run through potential legal scenarios and issues, did not recommend them to go to a lawyer to protect themselves, and issues do come up in the future, the courts will look to you as a professional that then you're responsible for a lot of that. Yes.
I got it. Yep.
That's where you don't, at the end of the day, if you're an investor and you're going to invest money, if you're a realtor and you're going to assist an investor, you can't dabble. This is why we stay away from dabblers and people that are not in this industry as professionals. If you're going to a realtor that doesn't understand how a lease works, has never done it, and then you're the end buyer and now you're relying on your realtor, that's a scary proposition. When you have someone like Harsh that knows these are potential issues and knows to steer you and brings you the professional, this is the kind of person you want to work with. So that's where it shows, again, the difference in a professional, non-professional, as far as bringing up the issues, referring them to the right professionals so they're getting the best possible advice, which means less liability potentially for you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure. Last but not least, I saved the best thing for last because we did discuss it. You need a business plan. If you're going to do real estate investing, yes, you have to have a business plan and you have to have your game plan of how things are going to work. Don't make your business plan after the fact. Lenders don't always ask for it. They should, because, if you're going to go open up a business and you're going to go open up a clothing store and you're going to go borrow money, the lender's going to ask you, absolutely, what's your business plan? How's this going to work? How are you going to have money to close this thing? What's your long-term play with this? So do this. It's no different. You're going to open up that clothing store, buying a property to invest in. You should have a business plan. Understand your short-term and long-term plan. Why are you buying this property? The return of investment, ROI, so that the money coming in on rent and the expenses are going out, it's making you money every month, every year? Or do you care about the potential to tear down a property and development potential in the future, so you don't care what the return is? Whatever it is, you have to understand how finances work. If you're going to be working with clients that are going to be doing real estate investing, you have to be able to walk through them to understand, is this a good business proposition? The really strong realtors that work with the investors, whether it's commercial or residential, they come to them and they run numbers through with them. So this is a great return on investment. This is how much it's going to generate for you every year. Or This is the appreciation shown. So you can project in 10 years that you're going to double the value of your property, whatever it being. Make sure that there's some sort of plan, an end plan of what this thing is, so that it makes sense as an investment, period. Are you going to own multiple properties? Are you going to purchase, renovate, and flip? What's that going to look like? If you're going to be doing that a lot, now it's very difficult because property values are so expensive that if you go and buy, renovate, and flip, it may be worth almost the same as before the renovation. So it's not worth it. And then estate planning is a whole different matter as far as what you're planning to do with the property in the future. Is it going to go to the kids, grandkids? That's where you're sitting with an accountant and a lawyer and deciding how you're papering that. So a lot of considerations go into it as far as real estate investing. And the more you paper things, so you have your game plan, you got your business plan, you're working with people, you have agreements in place. It's a corporation, a shareholder agreement / joint venture agreement in there. The better you're working with professionals and getting things set up, the less likely you're going to have issues in the future. So that is our presentation. I'm going to stop the sharing.
Wonderful.
And we're all back. So I figured it would take about an hour and a half or so, give or take. And this is the short form of it, people. This is where I'm not trying to alarm you, but we could be having a daily seminar on this, on each of those topics, and dig even further. But again, we're grazing the surface of it just so it brings it to your attention, so that you on a higher level can come to a client who's proposing to do a business investment as far as buying into real estate and saying, okay, thank you for bringing that up. Now I know who I should speak to plan for myself better.
Wonderful. Well, I don't have any other questions in the chat box at the moment, unless anybody else has something they'd like to ask. You can,
what do they say? Speak now or forever
yourself.
hold your peace. But
yeah, you can unmute yourself and by all means put your question forward. I guess my kind of just general question is, as you say, you should go to a professional accountant and lawyer.
Yes.
Any particular order that, it's kind of hard to go to everybody at the same time, because usually it'll say, what did your accountant say? If you went to the lawyer, and vice versa, what did your,
I always say it's always the accountant. It's always the accountant. Sorry, accountants. I love you guys, love you girls, but like we have to get the accountant first. And the reason is because everything is really, at the end of the day, if you're in business and you're investing, it is tax driven. Figure out, how do we maximize our incomes? How do we minimize our expenses and our tax ramifications? You should have the game plan with the accountant first. Once the accountant makes the tax plan, then the lawyer papers it. So that's the order of it. First with the accountant. Yes. Definite final answer.
Great.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Yeah, this is Harsh. Yeah.
Hi, Harsh.
Yeah, the best way to hold multiple properties is by owning it under the corporations. If one of my client is having supposedly 3 corporations, 3 companies, then is this the best way to hold it under one each under under the corporations, and one under his own name, one under his wife's name, one under his father's name? Is it the way to own the multiple corporations? The best way, rather.
It really depends on the people's scenarios, honestly. I have people that own one corporation and the corporation owns all the properties, and they think that's best for tax planning, so that if one has a loss, one has a gain, they balance each other out. Some for legal liability don't want to own more than one property in one corporation. So God forbid something happens to that property, somebody slips and dies, and there's a big lawsuit that they can't go after the other properties. So there are considerations legal wise, but usually it's from a tax planning perspective. And some people are very okay with having one corporation owning multiple properties. They have to consider also, like, if you're doing a joint venture and you have 2 people on a joint venture for one property and 2 different people for the other one, you have to use different corporations. So it's mostly relating to tax planning. I wouldn't be afraid of the cost of incorporation. It's about $1,500. So in the grand scheme, to incorporate into the company, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, it's another tax return also. But if you feel better, having a different corp for each property, then that might be for you. But certainly if there's multiple people involved, they may want to consider the corp side of it now. But if they're going to live in the property so there may be they sell it as their primary residence, they may not be advantageous to own it as a corporation. So they have to think of some high level planning that way. They basically have to sit down with their accountant, say the game plan of what they're planning to do with the property, and then they can make the decision of, owning the corporation, who owns the corporation, who's put the money into it, and what makes the best tax plan for them.
So in this case, the personal individual's income is also being verified and his credit is also being pulled, or only the corporation's income is being verified?
If it was only the corporation, then people would own corporations all day and buy properties all day under corporations. The corporation, from the lender's point of view, doesn't matter. They're going to, in most cases, you're getting personally guaranteed on it. So even though there's enough equity in the property, no matter how much down payment, most lenders still want the person to personally guarantee it so that they can go after them, so that they're not just after the corporation. If the property lowers in value and then you're left holding the bag and they're like, okay, you're suing a corporation, but the corporation's got nothing. They don't like that from a lender's point of view. So be prepared for the client that they're buying real estate property under a corporation, that they are going to personally guarantee it, in which case they are going to look at their personal incomes. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Of course. And you're going to get, again, copies of this as a PDF, and you have my contact information in there, including my email. If you don't remember my name for whatever reason, social media, you find me Chosen Lawyer, and send me a message anytime with your questions, whether it's yourselves as realtors, whether end users watching this and are thinking of doing investments or are doing investments. Happy to run through your scenarios with you and assist you as best as we can.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That was great. I think everyone really enjoyed the session this morning.
My pleasure. It was great to hear from everyone, and thank you for your questions. This was a great group, and looking forward to seeing you all. I think I'm back in about a month or so, and we'll be on to the next exciting legal topic.
New topic. Thank you
Right.
very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.